Good afternoon, collectors and friends. Welcome to another edition of Trading Card Therapy. This is episode number 87. I'm your host, the Dr. Leighton Sheldon. We have a tremendous episode planned today with just a fantastic guest. His name is Brady Hill. You're going to want to make sure that you stay tuned. In just a few minutes, we're going to bring on Brady, and we're looking forward to having an incredible discussion today. Before I bring on Brady, I wanted to just share with you folks a couple things very briefly. First off, we had the great fortune recently of buying a really cool collection of early candy and tobacco cards. This particular collection belonged to a gentleman's family, and they found these cards, believe it or not, in a Postum coffee crate while they were cleaning up this his wife's aunt's home after she had passed. She was a little bit of a hoarder, so there was really no rhyme or reason to what they were finding. But in this crate, this gentleman found a stash of very early 1900s candy and tobacco cards. Now, what it lacks in total number of cards and volume, it makes up for in names and issues. So normally, a collection like this that you found a Ty Cobb T206 bat off shoulder with a Sovereign 350 back would easily be the highlight of the collection. Or, for example, a Christy Mathewson with a really tough Sovereign 460 back would also be the highlight of the collection. Now, some of these cards here are either stars or Hall of Famers or toughies from the set, and they almost all have tougher backs like a Sovereign or a Tolstoy. However, the real prize of the collection is right here. There was precisely 3 E103s, and there's your M116 for good measure, but there was precisely 3 E103s, and by far the nicest of the 3 was a fresh to the hobby E103 Williams Caramel Ty Cobb. Now, it's likely going to grade low, meaning like a 1.5, maybe a 2, but what it's lacking in a high grade, it certainly is making up for in appeal, as that red is beautiful. You can see nice even corner wear. And although it's got a little bit of surface wear, nothing that's obtrusive to the look of this fresh to the hobby beauty. So super excited about that. If you want to check out the video and the full story about this collection, you could do that very soon on our website at our blog at blog.justcollect.com. And the other thing I wanted to mention before I bring on Brady in just a minute is this upcoming weekend, I'm going to be doing a buy trip in the Buffalo and Rochester areas. So if you are interested in getting together for just a beer, you want to talk about the hobby, you want to maybe do a trade or potentially get some of your cards looked at, appraised, and have an offer made on them, you could drop me a line directly at my email, leighton@justcollect.com, or DM me right on Facebook or Instagram. So without further ado, I'd like to bring on Brady Hill. Great. Brady, can you hear me okay?
I can. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Awesome. Thanks for having me, Leighton.
Oh, I'm thrilled for this. I've been doing some research for the last few days, and honestly, every time I read an article about, your collection or, something that you were talking about over the last several years, like with SCD or any of those other types of interviews you maybe have done with PSA, I'm like, oh my God, he has what in his collection? And I kept saying that over and over. So I'm really excited to have you on the show today.
Yeah, I'm excited too.
So maybe we could start here, Brady, for those that maybe don't know you and are either watching this on my YouTube channel or they're just listening to this podcast on Apple or Spotify. If you can give us a little bit of a background as to how you maybe got involved in baseball cards. Was it as a little kid? Was it as an adult? And what were the circumstances that got you involved in it?
Yeah, I grew up in Louisiana, and my dad had a connection at the local candy distributorship. And so anytime cases of cards would come in, 84 Donruss, 85 Donruss, 84 Tops, they would be like, does Brady want these? And they were like $200 a case. And I was mowing several yards a week for like $10 a yard. And I was just buying baseball cards. And my mom's dining room table was where we were ripping them and putting sets together. And then my dad was like, we got to sell Darryl Strawberry and Don Mattingly. And I'm like, Dad, you're crazy. Darryl Strawberry's the greatest player of all time. he's like, no, we need to sell these guys, and you should buy guys like Mickey Mantle and Hank Aaron and so on and so forth. So, then I had a really good mentor as a kid in San Antonio. His name was Arnie Glasscock. And in the 80s, he used to let me set up at the National with him or other regional shows in the South, where he really kind of taught me buying, selling, merchandising. It wasn't just like how to buy things, but it was like really how to price things, how to negotiate. And, so I paid my way through college and everything with baseball cards. And then I took a hiatus till about 2000, probably 9. And then I kind of, I left the hobby when there was no PSA grading or anything like that. But, then I started like, hey, on eBay, I can buy like PSA 852 commons and stuff. So I started like following a lot of those cards and auctions. And I started like, this is when I just really lost it, because I was just like, I didn't know what I was doing. I was just buying anything and everything. There was no purpose to but I just loved it. And I was like, it just brought back all those feelings as a kid where, if you truly love this stuff, it's like, it's so fun and so great. Like it's the best. And I could talk about this stuff every minute of the day, all day. I never get tired of it.
That's really cool. I appreciate you sharing that perspective. It's something I think that we have in common, Brady, is that I also try to utilize cards to buy and sell, and earn profits, if you will, while I was in undergraduate school in college at Rutgers in New Jersey. And I think we both agree we're similar enough in age that when we were doing that in college, that market is no longer in existence. So it's completely changed.
Right.
Led by grading, technology, and of course, a myriad of other factors.
Right. No, totally. It's totally changed. But it's kind of like, Leighton, things change now. Like, and I'm constantly selling stuff. Like, I don't just collect and put stuff away. Like, I'll buy stuff and then buy a piece of real estate, or like I do all kinds of crazy stuff with cards, or sell cards and buy different cards. And, my convictions of 10 years ago are a lot different than they were 5 years ago. And they're a lot different than they were during COVID. And my view on things now is different than they were during COVID. So it's like, I think change is, constant. Like you really, I feel like if you're not changing your thought processes on things, you could kind of get a little stale and a little locked into not having as much fun.
Totally agree with you. And let's be clear. I think, Brady, what we're really talking about is a solid lesson for life, right? I'm not sure if you have kids, but I have a 9-year-old son. And, I know that if my son does the same things he's doing now in 5 years, it's likely that he's not going to be growing at a rate that he'll be happy with, or maybe his parents are going to be happy with. And so I agree with you. Even just something as simple as content, for example. I was even remarking about this the other day. I'm really glad that I didn't ask you, like on episode 10 or 11 of Trading Card Therapy, to join, because I've seen how far I've come. This is episode, I think, 87. And really, our production is much better. The content is better. But Brady, that happened from all the work that we put in.
Right.
And obviously recognizing that things were changing, they were evolving, and we could either take part in that and try to stay ahead of the curve, or just stay the same and kind of become a little bit stale, as you said.
Yeah, exactly.
So what's the trick for you as a super collector, if you will, to make sure that things don't stay stale for you? So in other words, you just alluded to that, you're not just buying, you're not just consuming, you're also selling. And to me, what that says is you like the action. And I think that's super cool, because, and I can see you smile, that means you're exactly like me and probably a lot of other collectors that are out there. And so how do you kind of balance everything? In other words, I know that you're not just a collector, but you're a serious investor. You're looking towards the future. What does a particular piece or a set or an item mean to you? What does that mean to the future of that particular space? But how do you make sense of all the noise and really, as you just alluded to, say, you know what? I think for this particular period, month, week, etc., I spent a lot and I think I can flip this MJ. So I'm just curious, in your mind, how do things work? How does that process transpire for you?
I think for me, you kind of asked several questions there, but I think on how do I keep it fresh for myself is I'm constantly learning. So like stuff in the 90s, for example, until like 3 years ago, I was having a discussion with Nat and I was like, I don't own any 90s cards. Like what? PMG, Precious, what? And like now I'm obsessed. Like it's like crazy. And like I pay a lot of attention and talk to a lot of people and I still don't know everything. Like I'm not even close. Like there's so many little nuances within any collectible area. I mean, I've learned a lot about video games. I've learned a lot about comic books. I've learned a lot about sports memorabilia. Like I love just the learning process. I feel like it keeps me sharp and it's easy for me to relate to like 90s, for example, with T206s. And how many people do you know that collect 90s and T206s? It's like there's not very many people, but you talk about the rare backs, like some of the cards you were just showing, Leighton, and like we understand the rarity piece of that. And so like I just sold off I guess it's been about a year and a half now, almost 5,000 of my T206s, all my rare back runs through Fanatics. I don't know if you saw any of those auctions or not, but
I saw some of them. I didn't realize they were yours.
Some of those were pop ones, pop twos, pop threes, pop fives. And like, maybe it's a common player, maybe it's a star, Hall of Famer, whatever, but like you can kind of relate that to the supply and demand piece of some of these serial numbered 90s things. And I think the older I've gotten, I've done a couple of these interviews where I talked about kind of my 3 R's, like things that are rare, things that are relevant, and things that are replaceable. So like, or irreplaceable, but like the things that are replaceable to me now that, and maybe this is a bad example, but a 52 mantle in a PSA 8. Beautiful card, own several of them. They're awesome. I've owned a PSA 9 twice, but the PSA 9 is not replaceable, but the PSA 8 is. So like it's basically just takes a checkbook to buy the card or an 86 Fleer Jordan 10. So the cards that just take a checkbook for me to write are always the ones that are easiest for me to sell. But it's the stuff that if I sell it, I'm never getting it back. Like, so that's the stuff that, there's still a lot of that's still with me because like I know I'll never see it again. So like I have that filter now where, let's say during COVID, when I was buying and selling tons of stuff, I really didn't have that filter on as clearly, even though I kind of always knew that filter. Boy, I just kind of rambled there a little bit, but.
No, this has been great. Listen, if you've seen my content, I know you've seen some of it, Brady. I like to talk. So I got goosebumps. And if this is a good time to take a quick break here, I got goosebumps because you said a few minutes ago that, and I think you're right, there's not many folks out there that are collecting T206s and like 90s cards. And I'm certainly not doing it at your level, but I love it nonetheless. And I do collect T206s. And I was just writing down, for example, a card from the 90s that I think is going to fit the bill of what we're talking about, that I have no intention of selling. And I've been offered a lot of money for it. It's a PMG of Hulk Hogan from the Upper Deck employee set that contains the Mike Tyson, the Tiger Woods, the McElroy, and I think there's maybe 1 or 2 others.
Yep.
And I love that card. I'm still looking for another copy so I can try to get it signed. But I have it in a PSA 10, and there's only 4 total. And of course, it's numbered to 125. And it's one of those where I know if I relinquish it, I'd likely be able to get back a numbered version, right, of that card, maybe in a 6 or an 8 or an authentic. But I'm not going to get back that gem mint card. And it really doesn't matter, I think, how much money I have. And of course, if I sell it for a lot of money, would I be happy in that moment? Yes, I would. But I'll tell you, Brady, I put that card out over the last few years in my case just for fun, because I'm also a collector like you, and I have the typical DNS on it, do not sell, right? Or NFS, not for sale. And, on occasion, some people ruffle their feathers, but really what it does is it opens a dialogue. And I've met some great collectors because of that. And I think you've made some great points in the last few minutes and I love the 52 Mantle and 8, but you nailed it. If you want to buy an 8 or lower, it really, especially if you're not caring about centering, you really just need a checkbook. But if you want a 9 where the population is determined at 6 at the moment, I think there's 3 10s, you and I both know those cards aren't being transacted. Right. It doesn't matter how much money we have. We could scream in the streets with our cash and wave around. It won't matter. And I think it sounds like, at least, that's what you're alluding to as you're kind of reframing maybe you're collecting. And we're always doing that, right? Things are always changing. But it sounds like you've really taken that to heart and you're practicing what you preach these days. And I'm curious, if that's the case, can you share with the audience today maybe something that a few years ago you would have never sold, but like you just shared, you sold about a year ago, about 5,000 T206s. And maybe that's the example we go with. But is there anything else you can think of that maybe now with your new kind of way of looking at the hobby and collecting, you've sold something off, whereas 5 or 8 or 10 years ago, you would never have done
that? Yeah, I think 86 Flair basketball for me was kind of the eye-opening thing, because kind of right when COVID started, I was having a discussion with Brent and Jesse, and I was like, I don't have any like 80s modern. I called 80s stuff modern, but okay. So I was like, I don't have any like Jerry Rice rookies. I don't have any Montana rookies. I don't have any 86 Flair basketball Jordan rookies. I don't have any Brady stuff. And I was like, and I had a little money I wanted to spend. I was like, can you help me spend it? And Jesse was awesome and Brent was awesome, and they connected me. And I know this sounds crazy now, but I think I had about a dozen Jordan 10s. I had about 59s. I mean, I was just spinning like a madman. And then, when prices jumped up super fast, like they went from like $350,000 10s to like $600,000 or $700,000 in like a month or two. Once that happened, I sold everything. And it's like, but I kept like PSA 10 sets, because I was building like sets too at the time. And that's where I held on too long. Like and that's where I think I've grown and learned, like in my head, look, that set is awesome. I love it. It's beautiful. It's hard to get 10s in that set. It's an easy set to build because it's not 600 cards. It's only a 132 or what. Like, it's easy. And the stickers to me were really tough too. Like at one point I had 5 of the cream sticker 10s, which I think there's only like 14 of those.
Yeah, those are impossible.
And I still have 3 of those, but I haven't sold that, strangely enough, because those are irreplaceable, like versus a Jordan 10. So like, I think that set really, and some of my 90s buddies like have made the same mistake. And if they're listening to this, they know who they are, because we've had these discussions. And it's not that 86 Flair 10s are a mistake. It's not. And I think they'll always have a special place in the collecting world and value, just like any other like vintage thing. But it's the rarity piece of it that makes it a little tricky for me to like invest in, if you will.
Totally. And if I could piggyback on that, it's not always, as we know, Brady, it's not always for collectors about investing. So I'll share with you kind of a quick anecdote about my collecting journey. So I love vintage basketball, and certainly everyone has a different budget. And even though I could afford to put together the 57 tops, the 69 tops basketball, and the 86 Flair basketball sets, I started shying away from set collecting as I grew older. I'm more of a type guy. And even though I completed those sets, I'm like, I'm not going to have a 9 Bill Russell or even maybe an 8. It's big money. And so when I started looking at what I really enjoy is the history of the game, getting to understand a little bit more about the players themselves that are in these sets. And of course, in the early basketball, there wasn't really that much being produced of these cards. And so believe it or not, Brady, what I did is, and I haven't completed any of these three, but I like it. It's a lot of fun. I started years ago by writing these players to the mail. And of course, when there's private signings, I'll try to take advantage of a couple of these signings. I'm not so much up on it anymore, but I have now I've now started to try to complete in an autograph form the 57 Topps, 69 Topps basketball, and 86 Fleer sets. And I'm more than halfway on all of them. But I know for me, like even as I share the story with my son, there's so much in that journey other than me just going on eBay, clicking buy it now, right? Going to a show, saying, oh, what do you have in 8s today? Or what do you have in 9s? Like it's far trickier than that, right? Some of the guys, like I think Benoit Benjamin, 86 Fleer, right? He's practically bankrupt. Like you can't get him to sign. He's literally on the run. And so to me, all those little nuances, it kind of reinvigorated me in terms of collecting. And I appreciate you listening to that, but that was like something fun for me that isn't necessarily.
I think you what you did was you made it something that's irreplaceable, and you made it a rare thing. And so like that was, you might not have intentionally thought that along the way, but like maybe that's exactly what's going on now with some autographed cards. And I've only owned a couple of those, but that's another way to collect and enjoy the hobby and enjoy the chase, that even if you were going to finish, and you know, it's one of those things you're probably never going to finish any of them, but like,
probably right.
But even if you finished, there's no way you could put a price on something like that for yourself because of the energy it takes to like go down that road. I have an 84 Donruss PSA 10 set, all 10s. It's been the only one for 12 years. And I get emails all the time on it. Hey, would you consider selling this? I'm like, do you know how hard that, like, no, like there's no amount of money to sell that's even reasonable. That, I mean, it's not going to like change my life to sell something like that. So I totally get what you're saying there.
Very well put. And it's kind of crazy because I know a little bit about your collection, and for you to talk about your 84 Donruss set, I feel like, Brady, this is why this episode is so great and we connect so well, because we understand each other. We come from the same camp. Like your 84 Donruss set is my signed 69 Topps basketball set. We're just having a good old time with it. And it's not about the dollars and cents. It really is about feeling like a kid, enjoying the chase, the challenge. And the reality is for me, as you said, I don't know if I'm ever going to actually finish any of those 3 sets. But if you're out there and you have some extra singles, drop me a line. I'd love to hear from you. So if I could, because I don't want to keep you all day, I'd like to switch gears. And I specifically wrote down this quote, which I wanted to share with the audience. It was from an interview that you did with, I think, my friend Greg Bates from SCD a number of years ago. And you said, quote, I don't want to go up in grade and have something that I don't appreciate as much. And I know I'm taking it out of context, right? So I'm going to provide some perspective and context here. You were talking about, I'm not sure if it was your 52 Mantle or maybe even a Honus Wagner, which we're going to get to in a few minutes. But I really love that you are in a position that you might be able to buy more cards than most, but yet you are still acting with the same kind of discipline that someone that might only have a $10 budget or a $100 budget has. And for me, it really opened up my eyes to your journey and the path that you're taking, and candidly, why you're successful, probably in your business world as well, but specifically in collecting, because you actually understand that as great as PSA is, as solid as SGC might be grading a vintage card, that's just their opinion. And you, Brady, as a collector and an investor, have your own opinion. So what I wanted to do is maybe from you, hearing your own words, what that is meaning for you these days in terms of your collecting, right? Because we still have folks out there that are on the registry and they just want to buy that 9 slab or 10 slab. And we're not saying that they're wrong. We're just suggesting that maybe when it comes to especially the vintage side of things, not every 7 or 8 or 9 is created equal. And the beauty is most certainly in the eye of the beholder.
Right. So I've got, that's a nice layup for me. Cause like, this is, I love talking about this. And if you've ever stopped by my table at the National when I was setting up for 6, 7, 8 years, whatever it was, like I loved to put cards in people's hands, and like people that have helped me. I'm like, this is not this. I know this sounds crazy because everyone's going to be like, oh, whatever. But like, it wasn't necessarily about the money for me that I would make at the show. It just made my day when I would have someone that spent $300 and it was the most expensive card they had ever bought, or $1,000 and it was the most expensive card, and I wanted them to have it. Like, because the joy like that to me is what just gets me, because like that's what it is. It's about fun. And I mean, side note, I've had so many people say, Brady, can you help me invest a lot of money in this space? And I'm like, no, that like I don't want that burden, like, because I love this stuff. And if you don't love this stuff, it's probably not for you. That's check mark number one. But when you talk about, I think that quote, I was talking about T206 rarebacks. And I'll tie it into 90s here in just a second. So like, let's just say green old mill cob, let's just say there's 10 or 12 of those in existence. It's a rare, tough combination. To me, it didn't really matter if I had a 1 or a 3 or a 2 or a 4. Like, I wanted one that was like great eye appeal. Like, I didn't really care about the grade. And so like, I wasn't gonna, and I did this with 14 Cracker Jacks too. I didn't just chase the higher holder. Cause PSA went through big change in grading standards on Cracker Jacks too, where anything with a caramel stain, and 14s, like every one of them have them. So, so anyway, so like, I didn't really care about that. I just wanted like, and I was kind of a centering nut with my vintage stuff. So it didn't really matter the grade. So to tie this into the 90s thing, unless you're going to have like the #1 set on the registry, I don't really care about the grade. I just want to have the card, because some of this stuff is out of 15 or out of 30 or out of 25 or out of 50. And that doesn't mean there's 50 copies floating around. I mean, if it's out of 50, there's probably 20, 25 of the stars. And like a Mitch Richmond red PMG, good luck. I mean, go find one of those. And it's like, there's a handful. I think there's pop 4 or 5 on the registry, and it says it's out of 90. So it's like, some of that stuff, I don't care. I'll take an authentic one. I don't care. Like, I just want the card. So unless I'm chasing like the highest grade set, then I get kind of nerdy with I need to have 10s or the highest ones or whatever. But I think that's where a lot of guys in the 90s, especially overseas, like so much of this stuff is still raw, because it didn't really matter. I mean, you could put it in a holder, and does it make it worth more? Certain cards, of course, but like, not really. I mean, if it's a truly tough card to find, people will pay for it raw, just like they would in a PSA 8 holder. It's the same price, which doesn't equate to vintage. Like, that's never
agreed. I recently added a T206 Nap Lajoie Hindu back to my collection, and it was graded recently, so their standards are kind of tougher than they used to be. Yeah. So the card's in a PSA 1. I know for a fact, if you put your hand over it, you would have said it was VG. And to me, it's perfect. All I want is a VG looking nap with a Hindu back. And if I can save money because it's actually in a 1, I actually feel like I've won something. Like, I'm doing better than I would have done. And so, I appreciate you laughing, kind of remarking. It sounds like we're similar in the sense of strategy is super important in this hobby. And if you take away one thing from the episode today with you, Brady, I want to make sure we implore that on the community. I like the fact, and hopefully we'll keep in regular contact afterwards. Like, I was thinking I would love to have beers with you a couple times a month just to talk and BS about cards, because it changes super quick. We're both nerds. We're clearly collecting. We're obviously investing as well. And like, I want to bounce stuff off of someone I respect in my space that isn't always worried about the bottom line. And, you know, being candid with you as also a professional treasure hunter and as a dealer, I know, Brady, that oftentimes I'll bring up my buddy Tony and your buddy too. You know, sometimes you talk to Tony, if we're not going out for the night, it's all about the dollars and cents. And so it's nice to hypothesize and talk about strategy, which is something that we've been doing on this episode. So before I move on to the Honus Wagner, I did want to bring up something that you just touched upon a few minutes ago, and I think was a great point. So I don't necessarily feel the exact same way that you do at the National, but I have similar feelings because I do this for a living. So, you know, I need to do well financially. At the same time, I did a trade a few years ago with a young kid who was about 12 years old. It was the first time he ever traded for a Wayne Gretzky rookie card. And, you know, we made a little video on it. I mean, that stuff, I'm getting goosebumps now. That stuff is super, super fun. And, you know, as far as something that's kind of lost, and I shared this recently, I think, on a different podcast. So I kind of love and hate eBay, and you probably feel the same. It's really efficient. It's helped me scale my business. But man, I kind of miss the days of like being a 16-year-old kid setting up at the mall. The girls are walking by. You get to go and, you know, get some candy from the candy shop that you don't necessarily normally get to go to. And my point is, you're having fun. You're having that human interaction, and it's really just a joy to be there. So I think something that's been lost on a lot of us, especially that's grown up and matured in the hobby world in the last 10, 15, 18 years, is eBay has become extremely transactional. And so to the point of someone will come to me at a convention, Brady, and say, hey, man, I bought such and such from you on eBay. And, you know, I'll be honest with them, I didn't even know. I'm like a little embarrassed. It's not because I don't value their business. It's because we've built it to a scale that I don't have to be involved. So what I wanted to bring up is not only do I second the notion of what you said about the National and conventions in general, but I've recently started to kind of tinker and toy around with, there's a lot of wonderful Facebook communities. Now, I know not everyone on here is on Facebook. They kind of want to stay away from social. And believe me, I'm one of those guys. I don't spend any real time socially on Facebook. But I have to be honest with you, gang, it's kind of fun. So in other words, it's a Wednesday afternoon. It's 7:30 at night, 8 o'clock. My son's getting ready for bed. I kind of have that card itch. Remember, I can go on eBay and I can buy, but it's very generic. I'm not going to talk to anyone. But if I reach out to someone about their mantle or a PMG they just listed or a really cool, you know, vintage basketball card I want, I love kind of the back and forth. Hey, like, what else you got? You have anything coming back from grading? None of that happens in an eBay black and white world. And I think it's wonderful that you brought up kind of like that energy that you're feeling. Forget about, you know, you're seeing it, but you're feeling it firsthand at a convention like the National, or to be fair, locally, like White Plains. I just went to
eBay doesn't give you a sense of community, but social media does.
Absolutely. And I think it's really important that we recognize that because sometimes I know that as I do this podcast, Brady, you know, sometimes I'll forget that it's not always the folks who are like you and I, who are like these nerds who've been doing it for a long time. It's actually someone who maybe just entered the space post-COVID, and they legitimately want to know, like, hey, where do you guys like to have fun? You know, because even though I'm acquiring my cards on eBay, I'm not talking to anyone. Well, Go to a local convention. You don't have to wait for the National. I went to White Plains last weekend, Phillies in March, and I'm sure that you go to some conventions locally by you as well that are also enjoyable to go to.
Yeah.
And I want to bring up this, which is a T206 Honus Wagner. And for those that are not able to see it because you are listening to this on Spotify or Apple or wherever you enjoy your favorite podcasts, it is graded a PSA 1. To me, it has really nice eye appeal and color for a 1. But almost more importantly, and this is kind of the angle I wanted to take with this card, the provenance behind it. This is known as the All-Star Cafe Wagner. So my first question for you, Brady, is do you still currently own this Wagner?
Yes.
Okay. So my next question for you is, when you were deciding to go after it, I'd like to hear about your process, your strategy, and the last question I have is, did the knowing the provenance behind this card have an impact on you wanting to go after it?
Knowing it was the All-Star Cafe Wagner to me made it worth more than a normal one, regardless of how it looks. And it just, this was probably the last card. I've owned everything, Leighton. I've had Baltimore News Ruth. I've had the Doyle error. I've had so many obscure, rare, expensive things, and I never owned a Wagner. I was always the bridesmaid in these auctions. And usually when I really want something, I'll just go spend too much money and get it. But like for some reason, this card had really eluded me for a long time. And I was in the midst of selling a bunch of comic books for some big money and heard that this might be available. So like I basically sold some comic books and bought a Wagner. And I think this card in particular, you can kind of get in the weeds a little bit with from an investing standpoint and say, oh, buy a 2, buy a 3, you need a 4. And my personal opinion is buy a bunch of 1s. Like, because if we go out to the bar and have a drink and we're with you and I are there, Leighton, and we've got 2 of our buddies that don't really know about baseball cards. They know a little bit. And their question to you is, do you have a Wagner? Their question is not what grade is your Wagner?
Totally.
And it's like, yeah, I have a Wagner. Oh, really? Let me see it. Oh my gosh. Oh man, really? How much is that worth? Oh my gosh, you're killing me. Like, it's got wrinkles all in it. It's still worth that much. Yep. So like, this is one of those cards that grade doesn't really matter. And it kind of goes back to our earlier discussion. Just have the card. So yeah, no, I'm super excited. I own this one, and just the story behind it. It's kind of cool.
Well, it's beyond cool. So I'm going to try to be succinct with my questions. So number one, in terms of the provenance, let's kind of look macro for a minute. It certainly impacted your decision-making with this card. Do you think in the future provenance, because it's certainly very important in memorabilia, but we could be here all day, and so I'm not going to talk about that today. But do you think that provenance in cards is going to be more important moving forward in the future?
1,000%. I think because it is in comic books. It is like, this is what I've learned about all these other categories. Like if you buy a comic book from the Mile High collection, that's like the cream. Like, so my Superman #1, Pop 1 highest graded from the Mile High collection. So like it's got provenance to it. So like even if it weren't the nicest one, it still has that story. So that the brand of the Mile High collection from years past carries weight. So like for me, this Wagner, I think in my head, I justified maybe 500 grand more at the time a couple years ago because of the provenance. Plus it kind of, I needed something because like, it's hard to find a perfectly centered one. Like there's just not enough of them to get like my usual vintage grading standards. So I needed a story behind it to be like, okay, this one's now irreplaceable. Because a Wagner 1, you know, last year was the first year I saw something the other day that one didn't sell publicly in 30 years.
Wow, that's a great stat. And also indicative potentially of what's going to be transpiring in the future. I believe if there's 3 more that come up in the next 5 years, those 3 will be institutionalized. They're going to be put away at some sort of institution, even if it's just the Brady Hill institution. It's going to be buried. Thanks for laughing. It's going to be buried for the next generation of that family or that business to enjoy. So I think you nailed this because you're right. I'm looking on the screen. Great eye appeal. Yes, it clearly has creasing. But let's be clear. I think that adds to the story of it. And of course, the provenance to me just makes it. I want to have a story behind my cards. And listen, Brady, it's no secret that blogging about these collections that I purchase on my website, justcollect.com, is a lot of fun, but candidly, it's an invaluable tool that helps other people find us. And so really, it's kind of like a win-win. I've had so many people kind of find us because they enjoy the stories behind the cards.
I think, not to just keep on that point, but like, again, we're out with two of our buddies and we're at a bar, and this could be a joke. And then so we pull out our game used Mickey Mantle glove. Okay. And then we pull out a Lou Alcindor jersey. Our buddies are going bananas. And then we pull out a 52 Topps PSA 5 Mickey Mantle, and they're like, oh, that's cool. Because there's no provenance to it. There's no story. Like, oh, that's what Mickey Mantle used to play baseball in 1961. Like, so that's why I think cards that have provenance or come from certain collectors in the future should be worth more. I don't know if it will. You and I both don't know what the future is going to bring, but it sure seems like it should.
Yep. And it also means more to folks like you and I. So even if it's actually not worth the extra $500 that you paid, or it's not worth it's not worth a few extra bucks on a particular card you're buying in the 50s or 60s, it's all about how it makes you feel, right? Because that card can't help you mow the lawn. It's not going to help you increase your budget. In that regard, if you sell it, of course it would. But the joking aside, I think it's a tremendous example. And if we could, for just a minute, I know the way you rattled it off, it probably seems just so easy for many, but I know that you're much more methodical about your thinking. So when it came to selling your comics, what I like to do is maybe extrapolate a lesson for the folks that are listening to this in the future. And what I'd like to try to do for them, Brady, is say, hey, did you have an epiphany or an aha moment when you're like, OMG, I want the Wagner. I'm not going to go into my savings kitty. I'm going to have this one hurt, if you will, meaning I love these comics, but I want this multi-million-dollar, rare card with an amazing story. And so I know, myself included, we're not all going to be able to do that, but I think the process here is important. So I'm curious if you could shed some light on the actual process. And did you sit down with pen and paper or a calculator, or what did that look like for you when going after this? And what would help others going after their grail?
The comics that I sold, I really didn't have any intention of selling. And, I was amassing like rare books, relevant titles, irreplaceable copies, which to me, irreplaceable copies in the comic book world meant highest graded. So if it wasn't highest graded, I didn't really want it. So like all my books that I've bought for the most part are highest graded copies. It could still be a pop 5 or a pop 10 or whatever, but like I wanted the highest graded copy. But a lot of my books that I've sold were pop 1 highest gradeds. And I really wasn't intending to sell them, but the offers just kept coming in, and it's like, and this respected person that I've got so much respect for that was trying to buy them. I kind of wanted to help him, but at the same time, I didn't want to I didn't want to make 20% on something that I knew I couldn't replace. So then the decision was I was doing well on the comic books, and then this kind of just was perfect timing. So it worked out.
Well, I'm glad that it found a tremendous home. And what I would add to that, and this is what I try to tell people regularly on Trading Card Therapy, Brady, is try not to wait until the card becomes available or until the jersey or that autograph becomes available. Because we've all been in the spot where we see something that we want and maybe we don't actually have the means, or we do have the means, but it's tied up in a combination of cards, stocks, etc. And we can all say that we'll just liquidate. But you and I both know there's a process that it comes with. And what's the price going to be when you liquidate? And so I find trying to be prepared, even though it's a little bit more painful. In other words, liquidating some pieces from your collection that you didn't have intention to sell to be prepared to pounce on something in the future takes a lot of discipline and fortitude, but I think it's worthwhile, especially as you start to climb that ladder, going after, grails like this or 52 males and things of that nature.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I'm going to try to wrap up and have one more or two more questions for you. The first thing is, I know that you love the hobby from a lot of different angles, but if you could choose just one thing at the moment that you'd like to see be different, what would that be?
That's a good question. I don't know. There's so many things I like about it. I would say, and this isn't really that big a deal to me, but I think it is to a lot of people. I think sometimes there's some negative voices out there with regards to grading. Like everyone thinks they're a grading expert or something. We have to remember it's human. There's just some people that blog this or try to trash this company or do this thing and they're doing it wrong. Like, yeah, I just kind of wish, keep it to yourself if you really have those convictions. Like, don't use social media to try to belittle a company or a person or whatever in the card world. Because my favorite thing about the card world are my buddies, and like I love them, and nothing gives me as much joy as I met one of my best buddies and his son at a bar in New York the other night, and I said, "Bring 2 cards with you." So like we had show and tell over a bourbon. And it was great. It was awesome. And it's like, that's the best. That's the best. And I had lunch in New York with another really good buddy, and I brought some 90s cards, and we started ripping this box in Grand Central Station during lunch. You should have seen the people coming over. Like, what's going on over here? It was a $300 box of football cards or something. It wasn't even, we were like, oh, wow, look, we got so-and-so. And like, they weren't worth anything, but it was like, that's what's fun to me. And it's and you don't create these relationships over a year or two. You create these over a long time. But, I see how it turns your question. The hobby's great. The place is great.
Well, I like what you're saying about the hobby, and in general, what you're saying is, hey, and I feel the same. Listen, I think that if there's negativity out there that can bring a problem to light, I'm okay with that because I want to help the community. I want to help the hobby. However, I always compare it to high school. My son's in 4th grade, but it sounds like it's almost in high school. What's going on in his grade? He's telling me about crushes and all this gossip, and I'm like, Cross, are you in 4th grade or like you in high school? I don't really understand what's going on. But the joking aside, there's a lot of noise. And let's be clear, Brady, you know this as well as I do. You're a businessman. There's a lot of noise everywhere you go. So I think really what you're saying is it'd be nicer if the noise that wasn't serving people was a little bit less loud. And I think that most people would agree about that. The last thing I wanted to just throw out there was when you come back east to New York, I live in Hoboken, would love to talk cards with you and get together and have a drink. I think that would be a lot of fun. And just throwing it out there, I've never done this before, but you strike me as the kind of person that if you had the flexibility, even though you don't do this for a living, you might like to tag along with me on one of my famed treasure hunts. So I'm going on one this weekend. I know that's not going to happen, but if the stars ever align and we can go out together, it'd be a fun trip to do and document, right? Super collector and professional treasure hunter goes out into the wild, and we can see what we can come up with.
That'd be fun. Yeah,
it would be. I wanted to tell you how grateful I am for you joining me today, sharing a little bit about yourself and your story and your collection with the folks who are going to be consuming trading card therapy. I am just flabbergasted at not only the extent of the collection that you have, but candidly, Brady, and I've met you before in person, but how down to earth you were during our discussion. And really, I'm hoping that folks are going to take some tremendous value out of today's episode, and they're going to apply these lessons to their collection and their journey. And if you see myself or Brady at a future convention, please come up to us and say hi. We'd love to chat.
Thank you for having me, Leighton. It's been fun.
It's my pleasure. Hopefully I'll see you soon. Take care.
See you, man.
Okay, folks, that is our 87th episode of Trading Card Therapy. If you enjoyed today's content, if you enjoy hobby content, make sure you subscribe to my YouTube channel, Just Collect, And I'm also on Instagram under just_collect, as well as Leighton_Sheldon. Until next time, thanks for tuning in, and I'll see you soon.